Can I just follow that on, Commissioner? Have the Australian Federal Police interviewed any witnesses in Indonesia, East Timor, Portugal, Macau or Australia?
Senator, look, I think it's dangerous for us to step into who we've interviewed at this point. It's an ongoing criminal investigation. We have interviewed witnesses overseas. I'll certainly confirm that. But as a matter of identifying who those potential witnesses are or even their locations, I think we're in dangerous ground of perhaps compromising the outcome.
Okay. So you can't tell me whether, you can't confirm whether you interviewed Guido dos Santos, an eyewitness to the killings?
No, I'm not prepared to put that on the public record.
The fact that Mr dos Santos is now dead, does that compromise you in any way? Well, I don't know what's so funny, Mr Wilkins. I mean, if the witness is dead, I just want to know whether a person who apparently was an eyewitness to the killings, who is now dead, whether he was interviewed or not.
Well, Senator, as you can appreciate, whether people were interviewed, whether they've been given an opportunity to provide information may well give some sort of concern to other people who may be interviewed into the future. So I'm not prepared to disclose those issues at the moment.
Okay. So if I was to suggest to you that maybe he wasn't interviewed, but, you know, I'm just worried that there could be key witnesses to these killings, to these murders, that because of the effluxion of time will simply die.
Senator, can I reassure you that the passage of time is of concern to the AFP as much as anyone. We have endeavoured to conduct this investigation as quickly as possible. There are very complex international arrangements, mutual assistance requests, those sorts of things, which I can't really go into any more detail about, which by their very nature take some time. The AFP has had investigators working on this for a long period of time. We take this investigation very seriously, and those who can be interviewed and are available to be interviewed and can be lawfully interviewed will be done so as quickly as possible, and that's really all I can say at the moment.
But in order to interview someone as quickly as possible, as you say, does that in part depend on, for instance, the cooperation of the police force in Indonesia, or the military in Indonesia?
In whichever jurisdiction the person would reside, yes, it would require that cooperation.
And can you tell us how often the Australian Federal Police has interacted with the Indonesian National Police on this investigation?
No, I'm not prepared to talk about interaction with any jurisdiction throughout this investigation.
So you can't tell us whether there's been any interaction with the Indonesian National Police?
I'm not prepared to put on the public record the investigative practices or processes that have taken place in this investigation, because it remains ongoing, and to do so I think may compromise our ability to collect evidence from those locations that you're talking about.
I'm in contact with two of the families of the deceased, the Ballabo Five, and I think we're trying to arrange a meeting with one or two of them with the police, and I'm sure that will be arranged shortly with the Federal Police. That they are wondering. They've posed a question to me. This was referred. The coronial inquiry referred this matter back in 2007.
It certainly didn't come to the AFP in 2007. I think the coronial process took place then.
Yep.
It was then referred through the Attorney General at the time, through to the Attorney General's Department, and then to the AFP for investigation. I think it was 2009.
Okay, so it's been 4 years now.
Yes, it has.
Can you at least indicate whether any evidence has been collected in relation to this matter?
Senator, I can say certainly we've spoken to a number of witnesses. We've put in requests for material which we think will be important in the investigation.
Okay.
We've sought extensive legal advice about a range of possible charges that could be levied. There are issues of time, issues of reciprocal offences, issues of state, whether a state was considered to be at war or not at war. These are all very complex issues which investigators are working their way through. The main issue, as I said, around the time is the requests are made in foreign jurisdictions for support and assistance, and it takes time to get those answers back, which is beyond our control.
Are you frustrated about the delays in terms of, there clearly have been delays in terms of questions for either requests for assistance or specific questions made in relation to the deaths of these five, of the Ballabo Five?
Senator, I would have liked to have seen this done more quickly, but I understand the process. I understand this is not unique to this investigation, that sometimes these things do take quite a while to resolve. And there, as I said, it's a very complex legal environment, as well as a complex environment in which to conduct an investigation.
Is it appropriate for the AFP to seek the advice of the Department of Foreign Affairs and and trade in terms of opening diplomatic channels if that seems to be a blockage point?
Senator, I can assure you that we have regular contact with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, as we do with the Attorney General's Department, as we do with any other government agency that could assist us in working our way through this.
Look, I appreciate this is a very sensitive matter, but you know, for Shirley Shackleton, who's in her 80s now, she wants some resolution in relation to this. Have you actually moved past the legal analysis? In other words, are you now in the evidence gathering stage?
Senator, we have been gathering evidence for some time.
Okay.
Whether that evidence can eventually support a prosecution, that's yet to be determined.
But my understanding is that Professor Ben Saul has provided an opinion that says that there is jurisdiction here in terms of a war crimes prosecution.
We have a range of legal advice. As I said, it's a very complex area, and I wouldn't certainly be able to take one set of advice on a particular set of issues as being gospel on any of this, because there are a range of considerations.
So the fact that the New South Wales coroner relied on Professor Saul's opinion to commence the coronial inquest back in 2000, a number of years ago, why can't the AFP rely on the same opinion?
Well, Senator, the fact that we evaluated the referral from the State Coroner through the Attorney General's Department, we accepted this for investigation, was acknowledgement that prima facie there needed to be an investigation to get to the bottom of whether or not a prosecution was possible and whether it was possible to collect sufficient evidence to put a matter before the DPP and ultimately the courts. So we accepted that at the time, and we have been, for the last 4 years, been working very hard to try and collect sufficient evidence to put that matter before the DPP and ultimately the courts if possible. So prima facie we've accepted that we wouldn't conduct an investigation if it was impossible at law, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, because I think that Mark Tedeschi QC accepted and used this legal opinion of Professor Saul.
Look, I don't doubt the legal opinion. As I said, we have a number of legal opinions, including some from really the preeminent Queen's counsels in this country about jurisdiction and about issues such as that, which we are considering as part of the whole process.
Sure.
It's very difficult for me to explain this in terms on the public record as a current investigation, but I can assure you our will to see this to a conclusion is very strong. I cannot promise you that it will ever see a conclusion in the courts because there are a range of difficult issues which we are still working through. But as I said, we are doing our best to resolve the matter to the point where we can make judgments about that.
My final question on this, and subject to my colleague Senator Madigan, who also has a very keen interest in this matter, do you have an ongoing funding commitment from the Australian government for this investigation, and is there any sunset clause related to this investigation?
No, we do have funding as a part of our base funding. It's discretionary and we can use that as we see fit. To this point, to give you an idea, we have spent around $470,000 on the investigation over that 4-year period. That's wages as well as inquiries. That
was the amount that I asked about last several estimates ago, I think. So not much has been spent in the last 12 months?
That's right, because we are waiting on material from overseas jurisdictions before we can actually take this any further. Okay. There are still inquiries ongoing. They are not high-cost inquiries, but we are doing what we can.
Right.
Senator, can I just say too, I mean, for the families, and I know you've mentioned Shirley Shackleton, we have done our best to make sure they are kept up to date in the process. We have not given them false hope that this is going to be easy, but we accept that their keen interest and their keen will to see this to conclusion, as we do. But we have to understand how difficult this is. And I think when we first announced this in 2009, I think I might have even been acting commissioner at that time before I was sworn in. But I've got the statement I said allegations of war crimes give rise to complex legal and factual issues that require careful consideration by law enforcement agencies before deciding to commence an investigation. Now, we did decide to commence the investigation because we thought there was sufficient there for us to go forward. It's been a difficult process, a very complex process as we predicted in 2009, but our will to see this to a conclusion remains.
Okay. Look, I think hopefully I'll be able to get some more detailed answers in the course of a briefing with family members that I'll be attending with. I need to ask you a series of questions in relation to the Surveillance Devices Act and the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act, and I think I gave you a heads up before we commenced. And the context of this is the reports coming out of the United States that the US Attorney General Eric Holder in the Obama administration and the Department of Justice is currently the subject of widespread scrutiny and criticism for obtaining telephone records for more than 20 separate lines assigned to the Associated Press and its journalists. And the issue is to what that doesn't require a warrant. Now, that's United States legislation. Is it the case under the Australian legislation, that particularly under sections 178, 179 and 180 of the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act, that in order to obtain the phone records and the phone data, and also presumably the Facebook and Google data of a person, you don't actually need to get a warrant.
Non-content data, that's correct. We do not need a warrant. I just might introduce Deputy Commissioner Mike Phelan, who heads the area responsible for this and has given extensive evidence to the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, which has been considering this and data retention and a range of other issues. So I'll ask Deputy Commissioner Phelan, who has much more knowledge about this than I, to respond.
Deputy Commissioner Mike Phelan. Senator, as the Commissioner said, we've given extensive evidence to the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, who are currently doing an inquiry into changes to telecommunications and national security legislation. And a lot of our evidence is obviously on the public record there. We've given details about what the powers are to intercept content and the difference between content and non-content data. But you are right. When it comes to non-content data, under the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act, the AFP can have access to that data by way of an internal authorisation. That internal authorisation is done at the superintendent level, and under those three particular sections that you called out, the first one, which is the majority of our requests, has to be to enforce the criminal law. The second category is in relation to missing persons, and the third one is in relation to enforcing a pecuniary penalty order.
Sure.
I have some stats here for last year, if you're interested in how much.
Sure, and I want to drill down into so that how many authorisations were made under those sections over the past 5 years, for instance, or even last year will do, and you can take the others on notice.
I've got the last 2 years right in front of me.
2 years, that's fine. How many?
Last 2 financial years. In 2010-11, we did 50,841 requests.
Right.
And under each of those particular sections, under 178.2, we made 49,977. None in 2010-11 in relation to missing persons,
yep,
but 864 in relation to enforcing a pecuniary penalty order. In 2011-12, under section 178.2, it was 43,006. In relation to missing persons, it was 73. And in relation to pecuniary penalty orders, or pecuniary penalties, it was 283.
Okay. Now, during this time, and does that relate to Facebook, social media sites as well, getting access to those?
Well, no, because if the Facebook and things like Facebook, Google, so on, they're overseas. So depending on the entity themselves, if we wanted to get details of those particular individuals, we have to make a request to the United States, and more often than not, that requires some sort of mutual assistance request.
And have requests been made to the United States in relation to Facebook and Google?
We have made a number of requests over the time.
Can you give me, on notice, can you tell me how many requests have been made?
We should be able to find that out.
Are they in the dozens or hundreds each year?
I can't say, Senator.
Okay. During this time, did any carriers or carriage service providers not provide information in response to requests made?
Yeah, from time to time they actually don't have the information available. Now, this is subject to the current review at the moment, of course. When we request information, for example, for subscriber details under 178, we might also be after details of IP addresses and details as such. Now, if a content service provider doesn't have that information, because they haven't kept it in their database or their systems don't allow them to keep that information, then we don't get a request back. In terms of refusals, no.
No. It's sometimes say we can't provide it because we just simply don't have it.
It's a lawful requirement to provide it.
Sure. Now, how many of these authorisations were made in the context of investigations into suspected unauthorised disclosure of government information? In other words, leaks?
I can't tell you, Senator. That information, whilst we would be extremely difficult to be able to pull out. We would have to do it investigation by investigation. And I say that because when we gave evidence before the Parliamentary Joint Committee, we were asked very specifically around different crime types in relation to drugs, fraud, etc. we would have to go back through every single one of these investigations and see whether or not on our system we made these specific requests. So trying to
You can provide that information on notice?
It's there. I don't know if we'd be able to extract it out. I can't give you an equivalent.
We're talking about Section 70 of the Crimes Act, for instance, Section 70 of the Crimes Act, an unauthorised leak of information from a public servant to a media organisation or indeed to a Member of Parliament.
Yep.
Surely you'd have some idea whether there are any authorisations in respect of that.
Yes, we do. The information is there. I'm just saying, I'm trying to explain to you that it would be problematic.
And sorry, Section 70 and Section 79 of the Crimes Act, they're the two relevant sections of the Crimes Act, Section 70 and 79. So can you, surely you'd have an idea whether it's in the dozens or hundreds or thousands each year where you get these phone records in respect of leak inquiries?
I could say that any particular investigation, depending on the complexity of the investigation, would determine how many of these particular inquiries we would make. Some not so many, and some we would make a lot. But I could tell you the vast majority, though, of the 40-odd thousand that we made in 2011-12 would be relating to serious and organised crime.
Okay, but how many? Sure, and I think.
I can take it on notice, Senator. I can
but aren't you in a position to tell this committee how many referrals there have been under Sections 70 and 79 of the Crimes Act for those authorisation powers, particularly under Section 178 of the Telecommunications Interception and Access Act?
It's a two-step process, Senator. I'm not trying to be difficult here, but first of all, we have to find out. First of all, we have to find out how many of those investigations we've got in relation to those particular sections, which someone else could probably give evidence on. Then we'd have to extract out of those investigations how many times we made requests under Section 178 for information. So it is possible.
Senator, perhaps, I think perhaps where you're heading is it would be rare when investigating a leak matter that we did not use this capability.
Right, and I'm trying to establish how many times it's been used.
So I think if we were able to tell you how many leak investigations we have conducted in the last 12 months, which Mr Colvin may have the details for, now, whether there were multiple requests within a particular investigation, I think is more problematic because we wouldn't disaggregate those numbers down unless we went through manually the 48,000 or the 50,000 that we've talked about here.
But there could be several hundred, for instance, in terms of leak investigations.
We don't get several hundred leak investigations per year. But,
you do or you don't?
We don't. Perhaps, as Mr Colvin might have the details of how many leak investigations we have run, but it would be rare for us not to use this capability. This capability is a standard investigative capability which helps us get to the essence of whether or not something has taken place or not.
I appreciate what you're saying, Commissioner, but the fact is a journalist who has their phone records obtained, and you can usually triangulate with the data as to who they were talking to and when, they would be none the wiser that their records have been obtained, would they? No,
they wouldn't. But in my experience, most journalists are astute enough not to use their own telephones when they're actually doing this sort of stuff. So,
okay. Well, let me go to a group of people that are maybe not so astute, members of Parliament. Members of Parliament. Yes, I'm speaking for myself, Senator Parry. Thank you.
You have to have honest answers here, Senator Xenophon.
Thank you, Chair. Situation is that you don't need to get a warrant for members of Parliament for their phone records. You can access their phone records?
No, we do not. And I just want to be very clear, this is non-content data, so not the essence of what is in a telephone call, but it's when the phone call was made, the parties it was between, and the time and duration. Okay, that's what we're after.
But if you would know whether members of Parliament were the subject of these authorisations, wouldn't you?
Yes, we would.
Yeah, and would it be fair to say that members of Parliament have been the subject of these authorisations?
Again, I couldn't comment on that, Senator, because
I'm not asking for the names of the members.
Well, I'm not sure, to be quite honest. Look, I can say to you, this is not used. This is not used willy-nilly. This is something that is lawfully done under the Act. It needs to be an investigation of what is considered a criminal offence, and as you've mentioned, Section 70 and 79. I mean, these are criminal offences which the AFP are charged to investigate, and this is an investigative tool. And really, members of Parliament are no different to anyone else in the community. If there is evidence that can be attributed or obtained from that process, then we would take all reasonable steps to present that to the courts.
Yes, although for some reason people within the public service who have information that they believe is in the public interest, in the absence of adequate whistleblower protection laws, do tend to ring members of parliament and want to share information that they believe is in the public interest that could be of use for a Senate inquiry, for instance.
Like, I understand that, Senator, but where it's alleged to be a breach of the law, it's our duty to investigate the matter, and then it's a matter for the courts to interpret whether it is in the public interest as a whistleblower or whether it's something that has been a breach of the law.
So you can't tell me, Commissioner or Deputy Commissioner, how many leak investigations there have been in the last 12 months?
We've got those now. We've been having this
That's
discussion.
terrific, thank you.
Senator, in the current financial year, we've had 5 referrals to us, of which we've got 4 are being investigated, and 1 of them is under evaluation. Last financial year, so 11-12, there was 5 new referrals. 2 of them were investigated, and 3 of them were rejected.
Okay, so, but once you get those phone records, you can use them for other purposes, can't you? In the sense that you can establish who's been talking to whom at a particular time and a particular location. There's nothing to stop you from using it for other purposes.
Yes, Senator, I'm on the public record. That information, once it's given to the AFP, stays in our database.
So you can get a journalist's sources, in a sense, even on other stories.
Well, I know we will know the numbers they've called, whether or not we've gone to the next step of finding out who those made further requests under Section 178 to find out who those numbers belong to is a matter for the investigations team on a case-by-case basis.
And these referrals, can you say to us where these referrals come from? Are they from the Attorney General's office? Are they from a particular ministry?
They can be from anywhere.
Yeah.
Senator, that extension that the Deputy Commissioner has talked about would only be if further criminal activity had been divulged. This is not a fishing expedition. It's not treated as such. This is to really interrogate the criminal offence that's being investigated and to look at possible sources of that investigation. But again, because it remains in our database, from that point forward, it's not accessed unless there was another criminal investigation that was being investigated.
For instance, under Section 79, but to me, it doesn't seem so much as a fishing expedition as a deep trawling expedition, because you can actually get all their phone records and work out who they've been speaking to over a considerable period.
For a lawful purpose, Senator, and it's under the Act. I mean, this is a tool this is not something that we've made up here. This is the law, and it's a tool that we use. It's a tool that we use very responsibly, I've got to say, and it's a matter of now the PJCIS is considering all of these issues in reviewing the Act.
Sure, but my understanding is that these records can actually go back 10 years, as far back as 10 years. Is that fair enough? It goes back a number of years.
We could get records back that far if they existed, Senator. But as a general rule, though, we don't go back. The vast majority, and when I mean the vast, I mean over 80% of our records would go back 6 months at most.
Sure. In terms of oversight as to what you do with this information, what mechanisms are there for oversight?
Well, this particular sections of the Act, we have to report back to Parliament on their use, in terms of the numbers of them, and any other oversight is internal, and just like all the other business that we do.
But and I'm interested, and I understand the importance of the work that you do with organised crime and drug smuggling, and I respect that. But when it comes to issues of Section 70 and 79 of the Crimes Act, you actually build up a pretty incredible database that could go back a number of years of, for instance, who a journalist or even a member of Parliament, who they spoke to, who they've been speaking to over a number of years. You've got quite a database under this authorisation power.
It's not as simple as that, Senator. Every time we make a request, we have to have a legitimate reason to do so. And whilst we might have one in the very first instance to do, for example, a call charge record on an individual because we're trying to track down a leak, whether or not we actually trace down all of the other ones, the numbers that have called, we have to do on a case-by-case basis. And if something is historic and in the system, we have to have a new nexus again to be able to want to go back and check the details of those phone numbers.
Sure. Can you just tell me, going back earlier, what treaties govern the process of trying to get something from Facebook or Google?
Depending on which country it is. Google and Facebook are in the United States, so generally those companies won't hand over the information to law enforcement agencies without some sort of request from the United States government, which is we request through mutual assistance in criminal matters.
And you'll tell us how many, including Twitter? You can do a request under Twitter, can't you?
Yeah, we can make those requests. Sometimes we get things on a law enforcement to law enforcement basis, but sometimes we don't.
And Senator, again, this is more a matter for the department. We would make a request through to the Attorney General's department, and they would be the agency who would make the formal request through to the US authorities on our behalf.
Sure. Now you've got Deputy Commissioner Phelan. There's a software program. I think it's called Analyst Notebook that can crunch all these details, can't it, to sort of work out who's been talking to whom? Is that the software program you use?
No, it's not. We use it sometimes, but we do have other programs as well.
Okay, but that's one of the programs you can use.
Yes,
so,
it is.
but you can mine a fair bit of information from these records of journalists.
Well, not just journalists, but if we've got any journalists in there.
No, I'm talking about Section 70 and 79.
Yeah, we can analyse that data, and that's the purpose of why we get the data, is so we can analyse it.
Right, thank you.
Senator, can I just say one final point? I mean, we've talked about sort of relativities here. I think in broad terms, last year the AFP investigated over 4,000 matters. Five of those, five singular, were leak matters. So it puts in perspective the broad range of investigations we do, and this is a very, very small part, a very important part in the access to this material, and we've said that to the PJCIS in their considerations of this matter, and particularly with how long they'll hold content data for us to go back. The State Police have also expressed their concerns about this for cold case homicides, for organised crime investigations, for a whole range of things where these can be really important opportunities to put patterns together. So I know you acknowledge that.
I do acknowledge that.
But as I said, from a context perspective, over 4,000 investigations per year, and we're talking about 5 leak investigations, which may bring into focus the sorts of things you're talking about.
And you have my full support in terms of, but in terms of, I guess I have a different view of Section 70 and 79.
I understand that, Senator. And look, there have been many views put forward to the PJCIS on this. It's a very emotive issue, an issue people have strong opinions on. What we'd like to see is a balance in all of this. We expect appropriate oversight. We expect appropriate legal authorisation for certainly the more intrusive aspects of what we do. We accept all of that without question, but we also need the tools to continue to attack organised crime in the way we do.
And my final question on this: can you provide on notice, advise whether any members of Parliament have been the subject of these authorisation orders?
Look, Senator, I don't think we could. I mean, we don't specify real estate agents or anyone else for this process.
You're elevating us, comparing us to real estate agents.
Well, I hesitated because I didn't want to bring too many people into the mix, but we don't categorise people by what their job is, whether they be journalists, whether they be members of Parliament or police officers.
No, Commissioner, come on. You know very well that members of Parliament are more likely to get information about malfeasance or from a whistleblower than a real estate agent from someone in the public service. I don't think there are, I'm not sure that, Century 21 Belconnen gets too many calls from people dissatisfied with...
You may be surprised, but Senator, look, can I take that on notice? I'll have a look at what I can disclose to you.
Why can't you tell us whether any members of Parliament have been the subject of these authorisation orders?
Well, Senator, I don't recall any off the top of my head, and we're talking about 5 investigations of leaks over the last in each of the last 2 years. I don't recall any. These things are not done, as I said, without proper consideration of the requirement here, and also understanding and respecting some of the issues you've raised here. That's certainly part of what we do, but I can't recall any off the top of my head, but I'll take it on notice and see whether we can supply you any information or whether we think that's stepping too far across the line.
And in the meantime, I'll use a friend's SIM card in future. Thank you.
Senator Parry's